The Sun Bowl can be a launching pad for Washington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're talking Sun Bowl, all Sun Bowl today, because, we got to make sure we get a little bit of this kind of talk in before December 31st, when the game is going to be played, but we'll get there when we get there. Got to talk about some young players who we think might step up after we've seen a whole bunch of departures over the last couple of weeks from the transfer portal. We're talking about things that just you and I want to see. I think the last two segments are going to blend together a little bit for us, but this could really be a launching pad for Jedd Fisch's program. He's talked about, calling it the Sun Bowl Championship. Jonah Coleman's calling it that. We're not going to go that far. That's not where we are. But we've talked about how this could be very similar to the Heart of Dallas Bowl in 2015, which was a real building block for Chris Petersen.
Exactly, where it doesn't have the same aura, the same ring as, even the Vegas Bowl or, kind of one of those, like the Alamo Bowl is really kind of that second tier, the non-New Year's Six Bowls. But you got to start somewhere. And the fact that Jedd got to a bowl game this year when arguably could have won 8, could have won 5. I mean, there's a couple of those games where maybe they don't, snap out of it against USC, and maybe they don't beat UCLA, where now you're talking about not even making a bowl game. So you take it for what it's worth, and you take it for, if you can beat an 8-4 Louisville team, a solid Louisville team that I believe at one point in the season was ranked in the top 25, at least I think in the month of September, you look at it and say, that's a good building block. That's a good, because again, as you mentioned, the Heart of Dallas Bowl, that was against Southern Miss, where no offense to Southern Miss, doesn't exactly have the same ring to it as, hey, we beat Louisville. And it's worth noting, you look at some of the 26 prospects. I think Washington made the top 8 for Oaks Christian defensive back who also had an offer from Louisville. And so you're talking
Devon
about
Benjamin,
exactly. You're talking about some of these guys where, as you're moving forward into that, again, springboarding into next season, springboarding into the 26 class, you need to keep that positive momentum going. Again, obviously a win would no doubt strengthen it, but even as long as you're competitive in the game, because again, like Louisville is the favorites. I know worth noting the spread has gone down from, I believe, 4.5 down to 2.5 in favor of Washington. So again, odds trending towards Washington's way, Jedd trending up, the program trending up. There's kind of a little stagnation period with the defensive coordinator situation, but aside from that, everything is pointing in the right direction for Washington.
I like where you're going with that, because you're right. It is an ACC team. This is a really well-coached team. I like everything that they're building over there. And Washington, think about CJ May. They've lost 1 or 2 battles to Louisville on the recruiting trail. And if you want to talk basketball as well, with Corey Johnson going there. But I look at this and I say, you talk about it. Yeah, it's Southern Miss versus an ACC school in Louisville. When you talk about the Heart of Dallas Bowl, but when I look at it, it's more about the building blocks. Where I think about it, and it was a true freshman quarterback in Jake Browning, a true freshman running back in Myles Gaskin. Just a lot of pieces that you knew. Hey, this guy's really talented. That guy's really talented, and it's all coming together in a way that you really hope. And that was the thing that you and I really liked about this team coming into the season. Was there's enough veteran experience to get by. And you and I thought it was going to do a little bit more. We thought it was going to win that Washington State game. It had every opportunity to do so. We thought it was going to win that Rutgers game. Had every opportunity to do so. So you think about it in that light, and you say, yeah, these are certainly games that, got away from you, but you're still in the postseason. You still make the bowl game. And it's all about these extra practices that are going on right now, which is really nice. And you think about it, maybe they're letting Robert Balla do some defensive play calling if that's the route they want to go. These are all things we're going to get into a little bit later on. But I look at all these things and I just say everything is there with all the pieces that are coming back. We talked about potentially Thaddeus Dixon coming back for another year with the NCAA's ruling on junior college over the last couple of days. But you think about all those things, and it's everything that you want to see for a team that has the potential to take a big step forward in 2025. If these additions that they've made in the transfer portal, plus the 2025 class, can come to fruition the way you hope, this is that building block where you can take it into the offseason with some confidence and say, hey, yeah, we won our final game of the year, which is probably why they're calling it a championship. But again, we're not doing that. But it's that confidence that you want going into spring practice where, this last year, yeah, you were in the national championship, but you're coming into it with new everything. And that won't be the case next season.
Right. Well, ironically, as you mentioned with the Heart of Dallas Bowl and the freshmen, it's start for Damon Williams. I'm not saying it's a start for Adam Mohammed, but I'm sure Adam Mohammed will play significant reps. And so there are very much parallels to that game in 2015, which is why it makes it so imperative that, again, we can quantify the back end and saying, yeah, as you mentioned, Louisville has one quarterback, Tyler Shaw not playing the game, X, Y, and Z not playing the game. So everything is kind of favoring in Washington's way. It's like, but again, nobody's going to care in terms of, it's like, the people on Twitter will care, right? The huddle masters will care, where it's, oh, well, hey, you beat a nobody Louisville team. It's like, again, what happens if we lose that game? Then, oh, hey, you guys lost to a Louisville team that was 8-4. It's like, right. Well, so again, win the game and nobody cares. But same thing that Jedd mentioned, where it's, well, now you're talking about 250 days plus for Damon to prepare before Portland State in 25. And now that they'll have that kind of final 2.5 games of game film to look back, specifically at the Heart of Dallas Bowl, the Sun Bowl, where you're looking at Damon and saying, okay, how can you maximize this out against maybe a depleted Louisville team, maybe a lessened Louisville team? So again, take it for what it's worth, but it's like that even more proves the honest of, hey, maybe this won't be a big of a challenge for Damon. Maybe this won't be as big of an uphill climb. And then imagine we're going into 2025 and Damon's coming in and saying, hey, in spring ball, I'm the QB1 and I'm coming off a bowl win. So now I'm arguably, what do you want to say, 2-1 because you throw in the UCLA game that he came back for, maybe 2-2 with the Penn State game. But either way, you're talking about invaluable experience for Damon, who's going to be the heart and soul of the team. And then you can flip on defense, where Peyton Waters, maybe he gets extended reps because he's only played 3 games on defense. You look at some other guys, especially when you look at guys who have gone to the transfer portal like EJ and a handful of others, where look at those positions. Look at the guys behind him. Raheem Wright, Rashawn Clark, just Caleb Press. All these sorts of guys where this is a game where we've said it on the show before. You can get them in because, again, it doesn't count towards their red shirt or anything like that. And if you're going to use this as a true building block, those guys are going to need to get ample game time, but it also starts with having the starters lay that foundation so you can kind of comfortably be ahead in that game to do that.
Right. And I'm glad you said it that way because we know that they want to win this game. So it's not like, and again, we're going to get to some of this later on. It's not like they're going to completely turn it over to the young guys, but the reason that going forward, we're going to spend so much time talking about some of these guys that haven't played a lot all year or haven't necessarily been starters or big pieces of the rotation is because as of right now, outside of, we know Jack McAllister is going to be the punter. There are going to be 1 or 2 other guys that are in the transfer portal that are still going to play. Outside of that, we don't know who actually is going to be part of this team, part of the roster for the game that hasn't been announced by Jedd Fisch. So, there are certain points where, hey, Guard Memelar, he signed with Central Florida. Probably not going to see a whole lot of him. So if Pocky Finau or Michael Watkins is going to step up and take that spot, that wouldn't be surprised. And, you said it at corner with Elijah Jackson. Is it going to be Leroy Bryant, Caleb Presley? Since Curly Reed's at Louisiana Tech now, there are a whole lot of different things that, could take place on both sides of the ball. And with that being said, Lars, there's a lot we want to see from this game. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. And tonight, Thursday Night Football, Seahawks, Bears. Give me a Roma Dunze anytime touchdown. Love that. You go check out so many more odds just like that over on FanDuel. And if you just visit FanDuel.com to join today, that's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. You can make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Lars, when you look at this game, what's the number one thing that you want to see?
To me, it's can Damon, shake off the rest of the Oregon game, shake off, kind of, the Penn State or, you only got to put up 6 points and no touchdowns. Show what Washington is going to get next season. You're going to have Denzel. You're going to have Jeremiah. You're going to have all the guys that Will had at his disposal plus everybody that you've kind of gotten to connect with in the younger class, Decker, Audric Harris, Adam, X, Y, and Z, that you can just run down through that list. Because everything starts with DeMond. I know we'll talk about defense and guys we want to see, and Jonah and the run game and all that, and all improved offensive line. All that's great. But the only real objective aside from DeMond is the offensive line. But really, for me, especially with the way that DeMond's game is styled, being such an elusive threat, quick read guy that can just, notice the pocket is collapsing and take off for 25, 30 that he did at Penn State. Sure. I think it was actually 43, wasn't it? Whatever that ridiculous run was at the end of the game. And so, DeMond's got that ability. Let's see it. And especially against a team that maybe isn't, a Texas or a Penn State or in Oregon, where it's like, hey, you faced two of the best 4 defenses in the Big Ten in the last month of November. So Louisville won't have that good of a defense in comparison. This should be an opportunity for DeMond to say, hey, look what I did against UCLA. Watch me do that in the neutral site game and kind of maybe, take some sting away from GJ Lagway and the whole Heisman hype, because I think DeMond is getting forgotten in that mix.
So I like where you're going with that. For me, it's the defensive line, where I want to see what this looks like against, Louisville's line has been solid, but I want to see the push that we didn't see against Oregon, that we haven't seen at several points over the last month of the season, where if you want to win this game, you need to find a way to get a push. And that's going to start on the interior. You and I spent some time on the Tuesday show talking about, Sebastian Valdez, the pressure he was able to get this season, and how there really wasn't a lot behind that. And it's something that, it's something I'm just going to get to now, where two guys that I really want to see step up in this game are Bryce Butler and Linus Davis. We've talked about them all season long. And the way Washington is recruiting right now, it still seems like they expect those guys to be in the mix in 2025. But we just haven't seen them play a lot. We haven't been able to see them rush the passer, get extended just game reps. And this could be the perfect opportunity for that, where you want to win this game. So you're going to see Sebastian Valdez play a lot. You're going to see Jacob Bandes play a lot in his final college game. Probably see Logan Sagapolu play a lot on early downs. But outside of that, you want to make sure that you have a deep, fresh defensive line for this game. And not just for that, for going into next season. That's what so much of this is about. And that's why we keep talking about it this way, is because it's about the future as well. And as much as Jedd Fisch is going to say, we want to go out with a win for our seniors. Yeah, absolutely. But we know that the way that he talks about building this program is about its long-term future. And that starts on the defensive line for Washington, because we saw what it looks like when you don't get any push. You get blown off the ball at Indiana, at Iowa, at Penn State, at Oregon, on every single drive. And if guys like Bryce Butler and Linus Davis can show real progression in this game and going into next fall, that's vital for the success of this team.
Absolutely. So I don't know if we have a trigger warning graphic. We kind of get just a trigger warning real quick here. So the question, I like your point about defense. I'm going to take one step back behind them. Who takes Kamori House's spot at linebacker? What is that? Because again, you talk about the future. Who does Lance Holtzhau's gone. Maurice Himes, question mark whether he'll stay for the bowl game or just be in the portal and call it what it is. Because Jaden Wayne is another example of a guy where, okay, well, if Lance isn't there, Jaden Wayne's probably going to be perfectly right for some of those reps, and Jacob Blaine as well. And so you kind of look at both of those guys and say, okay, well, which one of those takes the Kamori spot? Because Kamori was very impactful in the reps that he had, and that's, again, why he was one of the better freshman linebackers in the country. Why, people are like, oh, dang, it kind of stings a little bit that Kamori was one of the guys that transferred. But that's also why he was so coveted. So now when you take that spot out of the equation, who are you going to use in that scenario? Who is Steve Belichick going to say, hey, let me turn Jaden Wayne loose. Let me turn so-and-so loose. And I think because that's, I completely agree with the defensive line. Like, they need to get pushed. But especially in the scheme, can you bring a fifth guy off the edge? I don't think you're bringing 6. But, do you bring an extra fifth guy? And who is it? Is it Zoe? Is it, Carson? Is it somebody who fills Kamori's spot? Because I think that's one where you had an opening, and now whether, Jaire Alexander or, insert X number of linebacker is going to take that spot. That's great in 2025. That's great in spring ball.
Sure.
Don't care. We're talking about Sun Bowl. Like, who's going to take that spot in the Sun Bowl? I'll be really intrigued, because there's a few guys who could take it, but I'll be curious to see kind of how they manage that position.
So I had an answer for that one, because that was one guy that I wanted to highlight a little bit later, but I'm just going to do it now. And that's Devin Bryant, where that's a guy who we saw play a lot early in 2023, where he played in, some of the garbage time games in non-conference before he ended up getting hurt. We know that's why he was unable to practice for a little while. He ended up having to have surgery. But I think that that's a guy who could end up being really, really important in the future because we look at where the linebacker position is right now. We've talked about next season. You talked about Ziri Alexander, Jacob Manu, of course, and then we talked about the true freshmen, but there are still guys on the roster, and that's Devin Bryant and Hayden Moore. And Devin Bryant is somebody who we saw him. I don't want to say, he looked over the top as a true freshman, but he looked solid. He looked like a guy who could be a really nice piece of the rotation there. And in a game like this is the perfect time for him to show out and just say, hey, this is why I belong in the rotation. It's a sales pitch for myself sort of thing. And that's the guy who I could see just kind of filling that role where I don't think he's going to blitz or do some of the different things that Kamori did. But if you want to stick him there at inside linebacker next to Carson Bruner or Drew Fowler or Alfonso, whoever else, that's just a nice way that you could utilize a guy like that.
Yeah, mind blown here. The difference between Kamori's 317 snaps and the next closest guy. I'll give you one shot in the dark, and I got another because I'm going to go back to the offense after this. But just buries home the point. Who do you think is the next highest linebacker snap after Kamori House this season?
Drew Fowler.
Close. This is Brian Parham, sir.
Yeah, it had to be one of those two.
So, but exactly. But it's like there's a significant gap between those two. So again, there's plenty of options. Devin Bryant, I like that one as well. But it's just similar on offense, where a guy that is now going to be back after not being back, so kind of the reverse in the situation, is Max McCree. How convincing does that left tackle spot look? Because, by the way, I know that we talked a lot about Abdul Carter, rightfully so. Louisville, Ashton Gillette. G-O-L-O-T.
Yeah, he's a good player.
So we're talking 59 total pressures. Now 5 sacks, 7 7 hits, and all that sort of stuff. More total pressures than two of the next two Louisville guys combined. Now there's like 3 guys tied for 22, but you still pick either one of those 2 guys and even go one step up below that. We're talking double that production. So if Max has ended up lining it up against him, or if he ends up going against Drew as a party, I think we've seen how it goes with Drew. Max hasn't played since the first drive of the Iowa game. So getting that rust off, getting him to kind of, finish a full game. Because again, as much as we like him on, as much as we talk about that.
Let me stop you there. And I think the answer for both of us would be yes. But because, Soane Fasolo was somebody they tried out a lot early in the season, do you expect Max to play the whole game at left tackle? Because I know you and I both expect him to start.
I mean, the only other option that we've seen in practice at least in pregame reps, is right tackle with the number 2s. So I could see maybe if maybe Drew doesn't have a good game, they kick Max over to right and bring Soane in. I could maybe see a route like that. I think especially for this game, you kind of want to just leave Max on the left, and because at the same point, if we're talking about Carver Willis and who ends up taking that left tackle spot, Max has got to get like a full game tape of convincing play, and especially now that they kind of seem to, make sure he was healthy for the bowl game versus rushing back for Oregon and things like that. Because that Max wouldn't have made a difference with Oregon. As much as we like Max, as much as I like Max, it would not have made a difference at all. This game, he can make a significant difference if he plays 52 plus snaps at left tackle and Damon only gets, pressured maybe, let's say, 2 or 3 times off that left side.
Sure. So I like where you're going with that, but I think the interior is really where I have questions because, like I said, Guard Memolar did sign with UCF. So I don't think we expect him to play in this game. If he does, it's one thing, but that's a bridge we'll cross when we get there. But I look at that and I say, what's going to happen at that position? Is it going to be a whole lot of Michael Watkins and Pocky Fee now? Are we going to see some other guys in this room? Because I think that's probably the most logical option right now, where we know how much they like Pocky Fee now. And if there's somebody who's going to step up at the position, it feels like he's going to end up being that guy. And, pairing him with somebody like Max, who we expect to at least compete for a starting spot next season. It's just curious to look at that situation, especially when we think about the way the transfer portal has played out on the interior of the offensive line, because, we know Garrett Hatchett's coming in. He's going to fight for a starting spot as well. Maybe there's going to be one more guy at the position as well. But somebody like Pocky, if this staff really likes him, we know they're not afraid to play guys in that mold, and that could start in the Sun Bowl.
Well, and I almost think it should start in the Sun Bowl, because otherwise you're waiting until a spring ball to have some of those questions answered. And even if it's just 10 snaps, even if it's just 2 or 3 drives, this is a game where You're only 2.5-point dogs. You should be able to be in this game. Like, you don't look at the talent eye for eye, position for position, and think, wow, Louisville is going to blow Washington out of the water. Now, you don't say the same thing about Washington either. And so there should be enough kind of opportunity there for Jedd to do some experimenting, to kind of get some feelers early out in that game, crystallize that game plan by the end of midway through the second quarter, so that you can roll into halftime knowing what adjustments you need to make, knowing maybe which young guys you need to give more run to, maybe pull some back at some other positions. Because at the end of the day, like you said, you're trying to win the game.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of guys at different positions that we think are going to step up in this game, which we'll get to right after message from our good friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Because of the new feature called Game Time Picks, it filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, which is great news if you want to go check out the Seahawks, the Kraken. Husky basketball is getting into Big Ten play here pretty soon. So many exciting things. There's so many more concerts, comedy, theater, so much more, because of the Game Time Picks creation. It makes it easier to save on all those different live events. And with all-in pricing, you can toggle this feature to show the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with the lowest price guarantee, Game Time will credit you with 110% of the difference. If you can find a lower price somewhere else, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Lars, one position I'm really curious about in this game is wide receiver, where we know that we're going to see a lot of the older guys, whether it be Jeremiah Hunter, Giles Jackson, who are both playing their final college game, Denzel Boston, of course. Probably see some Rasheed Williams as well, but Keith Reynolds is in the transfer portal, and I'm curious to see if Kevin Green is a guy that's going to step up in this game, where this coaching staff really likes him, and we were really impressed with him in fall camp, where he was making a lot of plays before he went down in the scrimmage that they had about halfway through camp, and we didn't see him for the majority of the season after that. But that's a guy who I was really impressed with, and honestly, like, I was a huge fan of Keith Reynolds, but I wasn't surprised that he ended up hitting the transfer portal because of what Kevin Green brings to the table.
Yeah, I remember mentioning that to you when we had the initial discussion of, hey, Kevin Green, like, how does that kind of fit? And where it's like, you look at all those guys, where it's like, well, one of those dudes gonna have to figure out how to transfer. Again, when we talked about, again, you just do deductive reasoning. Well, Kevin Green came with them as a former 4-star out of Bishop Alamany from Arizona, so hard to see him transferring, especially after an injury season. And I remember talking to Kevin Cummings before fall camp, kind of in that fall camp time that we had. And he's like, Kevin Green's one of the smartest receivers I've ever coached. And so you see, okay, if the staff is that high on him, you can kind of see why, hey, we're not going to take an extra guy here. We're just trying to look for one supplemental guy there. And I mean, I think the other one that I would kind of throw in that same mix, and I think the other reason I'm hesitant on mentioning Kevin Green for this one is Jedd did say, at least last week, take it for what it's worth, or this past week, whatever day it was that he last spoke to the media now, where he said that, the guys that are long-term injury guys are probably going to be out. Everybody else, there's no new injuries. Kevin Green has been that guy where it's like, hey, well, is he healthy? Is it just a redshirt year? Or are we just kind of playing it safe? Because this could be a game where it's like, well, hey, it doesn't count towards his eligibility. Could, save the I think he already did redshirt 1 year, though, so I'm not sure he could. But he could get a medical redshirt, I guess, for this year. But I wonder maybe if you get a medical redshirt, don't play in the bowl game, play it safe. But because I completely agree. It's like when you go into next season and the building blocks and guys, need to step up in lieu of some of these guys. I think this is more or less like this is a game probably for Adam Mohammed and Jordan Washington more so than anybody else that I would just look at. I'm probably in sequential order there, because Jonah's obviously going to start. Jonah's got to get his carries. But I do think this is kind of one where we're going to see a lot more Adam Mohammed next season, where we've seen the progression that Scotty Graham has as a running back, where you get about 80 to 120 snaps your freshman year, probably 120 to 160, maybe 170 your sophomore year. And then you're into the 180 plus, 200 touch era that Jonah will be in next year and kind of is this year. That's where you get the 1,000-yard mark. But it's all kind of staggered progression. And so we've seen Jordan Washington show some speed at times. This would be another example of, hey, you know what, maybe we just put 3 or 4 plays. Just a couple of gadget ways to see how this offense looks, because there's plenty of young talent, and it's going to have to come together sooner rather than later.
So one thing I'm really curious about in that regard, and these are minor things, on the surface, but they're certainly important down the line, is Jordan Washington going to be returning kicks? Where maybe it'll be Daniel Ngata in this game, because we know he's got some experience in that, but if Jordan Washington's the guy that they want doing that long term, I know neither of us would be surprised at the long speed that he brings to the table. So that's something I'm really curious about there. Jason Robinson's another option where just in terms of the kick return, we saw him doing that and returning punts throughout spring and fall practice. So a couple options to keep in mind there. But I think we need to talk about the defense as well. Talk about the defensive line. I want to dive into the secondary because Lars, somebody who we didn't see a lot through fall camp, he struggled with some injuries early on. And then when he did come on, he came on pretty strong, was Caleb Presley. And this is a guy who is always just going to generate local buzz where, one of the top recruits in the state in the class of 23 flips to Washington from Oregon on signing day. So people love that story. People always love the stealing somebody away from your rival sort of thing. And I'm just curious because I think that this is a guy who could potentially make a big impact where with his size, we thought he might end up being a little bit more of a slot corner, but Jordan Shaw has been really good there. So this is something where we're going to see that. We're going to see Ephesians Prysock. But the question is, who's going to be behind them? And we've seen Leroy Bryant get some run there over the course of the season. But maybe this is one of those occasions where, hey, John Richardson's going to say to Caleb Presley that it's time for him to step up. And I don't want to say show what he's got because he's got way more eligibility remaining, but it could be just an audition for him going into the spring.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think in a way that's kind of what the last 2 weeks have been for this coaching staff is like, okay, who of that young class is gonna show out and say, hey, you know what, I deserve some reps in the Sun Bowl. Like how many will be determined A as game flow goes and B as the script goes. But there's plenty of, I mean, you can look on both sides of the ball. I mean, I would think in the secondary, you're probably looking at Tristan Dunn's gone, Elijah's gone. You look at some spots, there's probably 2 or 3 spots, maybe 3 or 4 in that secondary where, you're not expecting guys to play a ton of snaps, but there's enough rotation in that where, let's say you have, in a hypothetical case, let's say you're up 24-14 midway through the third. We've seen this staff, and to be fair, also some previous staffs, literally just throw out an entire second team unit midway through with a 10-point lead, or like a 17-point lead. It's like, okay, like we are now clearly in the too deep. Like, and that can kind of work for and against you. But I do also think whether that works for or against him, Jedd does want to test these young freshmen, young redshirt freshmen, and guys like that. So even if they did, end up giving up a touchdown drive, I don't think Jedd would be opposed to keeping him in as the game progressed because it's like, well, look, you're going to have to learn how to swim in the deep end one way or another. And this is about as good of a test as you're going to get where it's not Oregon, it's not Penn State, it's on the road, but it's a neutral site. And so there's plenty of guys. I mean, Leroy Bryant's one where I think, with or without that, that'll be one to me where it
I don't know why that popped up.
Anyway, I mean, it's always game time. But in that situation, you're looking at, okay, who's going to answer the bell because the coaches got these guys up to talent level. Like we saw Peyton Waters really improve this season. You've seen a number of guys do that. It's just a matter of, okay, now with this time off, now guys are left for the portal. Who's willing to step up? Because we haven't seen a ton of young guys. I mean, Curley was the one young guy. You could say Tristan Dunn as a sophomore is another guy. It's like, yeah, but both those committed to the last staff, so it was kind of not, I don't want to say expected, but it wasn't surprising. So in that mold, those guys, some of the younger guys did come with Fisch from Arizona or, kind of stayed on in that mold. This is now that prime opportunity because when you're going into spring ball and let's say you have 1 or 2 games with a tape in 2 years, what's the onus for some of these other guys in the 25 class coming in, like a Donovan Robinson or a Dylan Robinson, saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, you might think you're competing for that spot. Watch me take it as a freshman, and now you got to hit the portal.
So one thing I'm really interested in, just with one of the things you said there, we talk about guys that followed Fisch and, guys that were recruited by the previous staff, but then chose to stay on. I think about a Peyton Waters and a Paul Menke in that light, where I don't think we're going to see a lot of, the young safeties in this game. And I include Raheem Wright and Rashawn Clark in that as well, because of just all the veterans at the position where it's Cam Broussard's last game. It's Cameron McKeown's last game. Vincent Holmes is somebody who they've worked in the rotation already. Mikel Steen's going to be back for another year. But I look at that position group and I say, I'd love to see some more of those, but I don't think that's the route that this coaching staff is going to take in that game. Lars, lastly, I think one guy we need to spend a minute or two on here, it's not somebody that we think may have to step up because he's done it all year long, is Decker DeGraff, where I want to see if he's got a slightly different role coming into this game alongside Kaleki Latu. And I say that because, first of all, shout out to Decker, consensus freshman All-American. Fantastic year for him. We've been really, really impressed with everything he brought to the table. But when I talk about Decker moving forward, you and I talked a lot about finding a tight end who could fit the Tanner McLaughlin role from Jedd Fisch's offense last season in Arizona. That didn't happen, but mainly because they only had 2 healthy bodies at the position all season long. So through no fault to anybody else's, but Decker, whenever he was called on, he stepped up and he was really, really impressive. So I'm curious to see if his role is going to change a little bit over the course of just this game, where it's, now that you're comfortable in the offense, we're going to start trying some different things out that we want to do with you in 2025.
I completely agree with that. And I don't think I can really add too much onto that because, again, a lot of that's going to be dictated on how much the offensive line can, hold up to get Decker and those guys involved, because you don't have Ryan Otten, et cetera, et cetera. We'd be remiss if we're talking about stepping up just in general. And again, you can throw in some young guys in this, but this is more or less just kind of let's return back to a young player that stepped up last year. Let's talk about the special team just as a whole taking a step up in this game, because I think we've seen Peyton Waters on kick coverage. We've seen a lot of young guys on kick coverage this season and punt coverage and things like that. That's got to get fixed in a hurry. And it would be real nice if you could see that kind of convincing, hey, you know what? It wasn't great in 24, but they had really good kick coverage against Louisville. They didn't get burned deep for one. Grady was 2-2. McAllister sends himself off in a positive light. That's kind of like the swan bow that you want to put on this whole thing to say, if all goes well, the best part about this is going to be the kick coverage, because everything else, the boxes should be checked. Demond has a good game. Defense has a good game. Because, again, if you have one quarterback, you probably should have a good time getting after it.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason, throughout bowl week, everything like that. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, on that YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you hit that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.